An Australian walks into a bar, carrying a crocodile under his arm. He turns to the bartender and says, "All right, mate. Here's the deal. If I can put my in this crocodile's mouth for 15 seconds without it biting it off, you give me free drinks all night." The bartender, both intrigued and skeptical, agrees. The Aussie sets the crocodile on the bar, pries open its massive jaws, and carefully places his hood inside. The crocodile gently closes its mouth. The entire bar falls silent, watching in stunned anticipation. After 15 long seconds, the Australian picks up a bottle and smacks the crocodile on the head. Dazed, the crocodile opens its mouth, and the Aussie triumphantly retrieves himself, unharmed. The bartender, still in shock, honours the deal and starts pouring free drinks. He then announces to the bar, if anyone else can do that, they'll get free drinks for the night. After a slight pause, a blonde woman chirps, "Okay, I'll do it, but please just don't hit me so hard over my head with the bottle." A man sat on his front porch, staring dejectedly at the ground. His neighbour, noticing his gloomy demeanour, walked over to check on him. "Hey, what's got you so down?" the neighbour asked. The man sighed, barely lifting his eyes. The neighbour tried again, but the man just shook his head. Finally, the neighbour persisted, "Come on, what happened?" The man sighed deeply and said, "I messed up. I answered one of those tricky questions women ask, and now I'm in the doghouse." "What kind of question?" the neighbour asked, curious. "My wife asked me if I'd still love her when she's old, fat and ugly." The neighbour chuckled. "That's easy. You just say, 'Of course I will.' Problem solved." The man shook his head and groaned. "Yeah, that's what I meant to say. But what actually came out was, 'Of course I do.'" A man was standing on a crowded bus, holding onto the pole, when a woman behind him noticed something odd. She tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Excuse me, something of yours seems to be bulging back here." The man turned around, slightly embarrassed, but trying to stay polite. "Oh, that? It's just my salary," he said with a small grin. The woman raised an eyebrow and snapped back. "Really? Your salary seems to double every 2 minutes." Two couples decided to host a friendly dinner party one evening. During the evening, Jim accidentally dropped his napkin under the table. When he bent down to pick it up, he couldn't help but notice that Bob's wife, Sue, wasn't wearing any underwear under her dress. The shocking discovery left Jim flustered, and in his haste to sit back up, he bumped his head on the table, emerging red-faced and awkward. Later, while Jim was helping himself to drinks in the kitchen, Sue walked in and, with a sly smile, asked, "Did you like what you saw under the table?" Caught off guard, Jim hesitated, but finally admitted, "Well, yes, I did." Sue leaned closer and whispered, "If you want it, it'll cost you $500. Jim was stunned but intrigued. After a brief internal debate, he agreed to her proposition. Sue suggested he come by her house Friday afternoon since Bob would be at work. When Friday rolled around, Jim arrived at Sue's house at 2 p.m. sharp. After handing her the agreed $500, they went to the bedroom and the deal was done. Jim quickly dressed, thanked Sue, and left. That evening, when Bob came home, he casually asked Sue, "Did Jim stop by the house today?" Sue's heart skipped a beat, but she replied, "Why, yes, he did drop by for a little while." Bob nodded and asked, "Did he give you $500? Sue, trying to stay composed, answered, "Well, yes, he did." Bob grinned and said, "Perfect. He stopped by the office this morning and borrowed $500 from me. He promised he'd drop it off at the house today. Glad he kept his word." Now that is what you call playing the long game. An American man is visiting Sydney, Australia. Going around seeing all the sights. Suddenly, he is struck by a car, injuring him and putting him into a coma for 24 hours. He wakes up in the hospital, dazed and disoriented. He just sees the all-white room. He hears a voice and asks the nurse, "Did I come here to die?" She turns and flatly responds, "Nah, mate, you came here yesterday." A mother-in-law wanted to test her 3 sons-in-law to see how kind-hearted they were. She devised a simple plan. First, she went for a walk by the river with the eldest son-in-law. Suddenly, she jumped into the water, pretending to drown. The first son-in-law immediately jumped in and rescued her. The next morning, he found a brand new Toyota Corolla parked outside his house with a note, "From your loving mother-in-law." Next, she went for a walk by the river with the second son-in-law and repeated the same act. Without hesitation, he also saved her. The following morning, he too found a Toyota Corolla parked outside his house with a note, "From your loving mother-in-law." Finally, the mother-in-law went for a walk by the river with the third son-in-law. When she jumped in, he stood on the bank, chuckled, and walked away. The next morning, he found a luxurious BMW M5 parked outside his house with a note, "From your grateful father-in-law." A man is walking home late one night when he notices a woman standing in the shadows. $20, she whispers. He hesitates. He's never been with a before. But curiosity gets the better of him, and he agrees. They've barely started when a flashlight beams onto them. It's a police officer. "What's going on here?" asks the cop. The man quickly replies, "I'm making love to my wife." The officer, taken aback, says, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know." The man shrugs and mutters, "To be honest, neither did I until you shone that light on her face." 3 women are sitting in a beauty parlor, chatting about their husbands. The first woman sighs and says, "Last night, my husband told me he was going to his office. But when I called, they said he wasn't there." The second woman shakes her head and adds, "Same here. My husband said he was heading to his brother's house. But when I called, he wasn't there either." The third woman smiles confidently and says, "I always know exactly where my husband is." The other 2 women look at her in disbelief and exclaim, "That's impossible. He must have you completely fooled." The third woman chuckles and replies, "Oh, not at all. I'm a widow." A young woman was busy preparing for her wedding. As she packed, she turned to her mother and said, "Mom, could you do me a favor? Please go out and buy a nice, elegant black nail for me. Make sure it's long and doesn't wrinkle. Just perfect for my honeymoon." Her mother agreed, but got caught up in the whirlwind of wedding preparations. The errand completely slipped her mind until the last minute. In a rush, she dashed to the nearest store, only to find that the only thing available was a short, frilly pink knot. Left with no other option, she bought it, tossed it into her daughter's suitcase without much thought, and hoped for the best. Fast forward to the wedding night. The newlyweds stepped into their hotel suite, both nervous and excited. The groom, feeling a bit shy, said, "Honey, why don't you change in the bathroom? And no peeking while I get ready." The bride smiled, took her suitcase, and slipped into the bathroom. As she opened her bag to find the her face fell. Instead of the sleek, elegant black nightgown she had envisioned, there lay the short, pink, and very wrinkled nightie her mother had hastily packed. she groaned aloud. "Oh no! It's short, pink, and wrinkled." From the other side of the door, her groom, alarmed and utterly mortified, shouted, "I told you not to peek!" An elderly couple strolled back into a Mercedes dealership, their eyes set on the luxury car they had been saving up for. But as they approached, their hearts sank. The car they wanted was no longer on display. The elderly man walked up to the grinning salesman and said, "I thought you promised to hold that car until we raised the $75,000 asking price." The salesman's smile widened as he gestured toward a glamorous young woman across the showroom. "Well, what can I say? She just bought it for $65,000, in fact." The old man's brow furrowed. $65,000? You told us there were no discounts on that model. The salesman smirked and shrugged. She had the cash ready, and just look at her. How could I say no? Before the elderly couple could respond, the young woman sauntered over to them, her heels clicking confidently on the polished floor. She held out the keys to the car with a sly grin. "There you go," she said, handing them to the elderly man. "I told you I could get this joker to drop the price." She winked and added, "See you later, Grandpa." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving the salesman completely stunned and the elderly couple smiling triumphantly. Beverly is 90 years old and has been playing golf every day since she retired 25 years ago. One afternoon, she comes home looking downcast. "That's it," she tells her husband. "I'm giving up golf. My eyesight is so poor that once I hit the ball, I can't even see where it goes." Her husband, Gus, makes her a comforting cup of tea and suggests, "Why don't you take me with you and give it one more try?" "That won't help," sighs Beverly. "You're 103. You can't be of any assistance." "I may be 103, Gus replies, "but my eyesight is perfect." The next day, Beverly decides to take Gus to the golf course. She tees up, takes a mighty swing, and squints down the fairway. Turning to her husband, she asks, "Did you see the ball?" "Of course," Gus replies confidently. "I have perfect eyesight." "Then where did it go?" Beverly inquires. Gus thinks for a moment and says, "I don't remember." The teacher asks the kids in class, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Bob says, "I want to be a billionaire, have a beautiful partner by my side, give her a Ferrari, an apartment in Copacabana, a mansion in Paris, a jet to travel the world, a 200-foot yacht, and an unlimited credit card." The teacher, stunned, tries to keep her composure and turns to little Sarah. "And what about you, dear?" Sarah replies, "I want to be Bob's partner." Ma and Pa were two old hillbillies living on a farm up in the hills. One day, Pa discovered that the hole under the outhouse was full. Unsure of what to do, he went inside and told Ma about his dilemma. "Why don't you go ask the young'un down the road?" Ma suggested. "He must be smart. He's a college graduate." So, Pa drove down to the neighbor's house and asked, "Mr. College Graduate, my outhouse hole is full, and I don't know how to empty it." The young man replied, "Get yourself 2 sticks of dynamite, one with a short fuse and one with a long fuse. Place them both under the outhouse and light them at the same time. The first one will shoot the outhouse into the air, and while it's up, the second one will explode and spread the poop all over your farm, fertilizing the ground. The outhouse should come back down, right on top of the now empty hole." Thanking the neighbor, Pa drove to the hardware store and picked up 2 sticks of dynamite, one with a short fuse and one with a long fuse. He went home, set them up under the outhouse, lit them, and ran behind a tree for safety. Suddenly, Ma came rushing out of the house and dashed into the outhouse just as the first stick of dynamite went off, launching it into the air. Boom! The second stick detonated, spreading poop all over the farm. Then, wham! The outhouse came crashing back down right atop the hole. Pa sprinted to the outhouse, flung open the door, and called out, "Ma, are you all right?" As she pulled up her panties, she replied, "Yeah, but I'm sure glad I didn't fart in the kitchen." One day, a little girl was watching her mom make a roast beef. She cut off the ends, wrapped it in string, seasoned it, and set it in the roasting pan. The little girl asked her mom why she cut off the ends of the roast. Mom replied, after some thought, that it was the way that her mother had done it. That night, Grandma came to dinner, and the little girl and her mom went to her and asked why she had cut the end off of the roast before cooking. After some thought, Grandma replied that was the way her mother had done it. Now, great-grandmother was quite old and in a nursing home. But the little girl went with her mom and Grandma to see her and again asked the question. Grandma looked at them a bit annoyed and said, "So it would fit in the pan, of course." There lived an elderly lawyer who was known for his sharp wit and unwavering honesty. He had a loving wife and a bustling household of 12 lively children. Though his days were filled with chaos and laughter, he found himself in a predicament. His rental agreement was ending, and he needed to find a new home for his big family. But there was a problem. Whenever he mentioned having 12 children, landlords would politely decline, fearing the wear and tear such a large brood might bring to their property. The lawyer, true to his profession, refused to lie about his situation. After all, lawyers don't lie. They find creative solutions. One day, inspiration struck. The lawyer asked his wife to take 11 of their children on an outing to the cemetery for a peaceful stroll. Meanwhile, he took the youngest child with him to meet a real estate agent. At one of the viewings, the lawyer was impressed by a charming home with a beautiful garden. The agent, eager to finalize the deal, asked, "How many children do you have, sir?" The lawyer replied truthfully, "I have 12 children." The agent, raising an eyebrow, followed up, "And where are the others?" With a solemn expression and a dramatic pause, the lawyer answered, "They are in the cemetery, with their mother." The agent, moved by what he assumed was a tragic story, didn't press further and quickly handed over the keys. The family soon moved into their new home, where laughter and joy filled the rooms once again. Old Gus and Ethel lived in a small rural town, spending their days tending to their simple farm. One morning, Gus realized the well on their property had dried up. Scratching his head, he went into the kitchen where Ethel was baking bread. "Ethel, the well's bone dry, and I don't know what to do about it," he grumbled. "Well, Gus, why don't you ask Hank down the road? He's a retired engineer." "He'll know what to do," Ethel replied. Taking her advice, Gus strolled over to Hank's house. "Hank," he said, "the well's dry and I'm out of ideas. Can you help?" Hank thought for a moment and said, "Sure thing, Gus. You're going to need 2 large barrels and a good old water pump. Place one barrel inside the well and the other at the edge. Attach the pump in between them. When you start the pump, it'll suck out whatever's left deep down and fill the barrels." Gus nodded, thanked him, and hurried to town for the supplies. He spent the afternoon setting up the barrels, the pump, and the whole rig. Just as Gus was about to fire up the pump, Ethel walked out, holding a fresh pie she'd baked. She leaned over to inspect the setup and, without warning, the pump kicked in with a sudden loud clunk. Startled, Ethel dropped the pie right into the well. "Oh no!" Gus shouted, watching in disbelief as the pie tumbled down, splattering everywhere. Ethel stood up, hands on her hips, and said, "Well, Gus, looks like we won't be having pie for dinner, but at least the well's full again." Gus scratched his head, looking at the mess. "Guess I won't be telling Hank how this worked out." Ethel chuckled, wiping her hands. "Well, it's not every day you refill a well with pie and pride."